If you are a Christian raised in the church, you likely have no idea what the actual historical teachings of Jesus were. I didn't. I left Christianity for the New Age 10 years ago. The truth about the historical Jesus and the original movement of Jesus followers that has been lost to history has been sort of forced into my path. If you want to know the truth, watch this video to the end. It is absolutely mind-blowing what has been lost over the last 2,000 years. Hey guys, I'd love to have you settle in with me today. This video is going to be a little bit of a longer one and not scripted. I'm just going to be speaking from my heart, and my 3 cats are in the room with me, so come hang out with us. Get a drink, get some tea, coffee, whatever you like, and let's have a chat about my journey from Christianity to the New Age to discovering insane truths about the real teachings of Jesus that have been hidden for 2,000 years. Most of you know my story with leaving Christianity, so I'm not going to belabor you with too many of the details today. I'm just going to hit the important points to bring you full circle to where I want to take you today. So, as most of you know, I was raised in a strict branch of Christianity, and I was in the Christian church for, I believe, 33 years. I left the church in 2020, which would have made it 33 years. In that time, I was as sincere a Christian as it is possible to be. Of course, people throw the no true Scotsman fallacy at me all the time. Of course, you weren't a real Christian if you ended up leaving. The church that you went to didn't teach you the real gospel. Well, that's more true than most people realize, as we're going to get into today. Look, my dad was trained as a minister. He began teaching me Hebrew and Greek around the age of 5. I went to church 3 times a week growing up, and we had devotions 2 times a day in my home. I got up every morning from the time I was 8 years old and read the Bible first thing every day. I had a thorough education in church history, well, at least the proto-Orthodox / Orthodox version of church history. I had training in debate and apologetics. I memorized the shorter catechism as a child, along with all the referenced Bible verses. I memorized literally hundreds and hundreds of Bible verses. I read through the entire Bible in chronological order in 3 months, right before I deconstructed, so I could get like a bird's eye view. If you hear noise, it's my cats playing behind me. I prided myself on going to a, quote, liberal college and retaining my Christian faith. When a large majority of my generation was deconstructing, I researched all the reasons that people deconstructed in my early 20s and came up with counter arguments and prided myself on staying true to my faith. When I deconstructed, finally, around the age of 28, it was for very specific reasons. This is the one that's making noise today. This is actually my daughter's cat, Storm, or as we call her, Floofy. Have you ever heard the saying, yeah, I did read the Bible, I did study the Bible, I did all the things, and that's why I ended up deconstructing? Well, that was very true for me. I'm a very thorough researcher, and I always want to research all sides, all possible perspectives of an issue. I want to know the arguments against my position so I can uncover any blind spots in my viewpoint, and then I want to know the counter arguments to those arguments and the counter arguments to those arguments, and so on until I feel like I have a thorough grasp of a topic. So for me, because I did so much research, it ended up backfiring, and I ended up being able to see like this perspective of evangelical Christianity just at the end of the day does not hold water. There are too many logical inconsistencies. It's obvious that the Bible is not inerrant when you really study it. There's too many contradictions. And really, when I began studying other belief systems, it became obvious that Christianity was just another religion leading to the same place. The teachings, the core teachings of all the world's major religions boil down to love God and love your neighbor. And that evangelical Christianity is one path to lead to that end goal, but it's not the only path. And it also isn't the best path to follow if you want to have real divine experience, real spiritual growth, real God union, which is what I was seeking. These were some of the major reasons that I ended up leaving the faith at the age of 28 years old when I was pregnant with my third child. I've gone into a lot of detail in previous videos, my most recent series, 3-video series on why I left Christianity. So I won't belabor the point today. But what I do want to highlight is that I was in the Christian faith for 33 years, ended up seeing all the blind spots, all the inconsistencies, all the contradictions, all the logical fallacies in that faith. And I kind of exited Christianity directly into the New Age movement because one of the real catalysts for my deconstruction was discovering near-death experience accounts, which I've also gone into a ton of detail. I created an entire podcast around interviewing near-death experiencers and spiritual experiencers. But what I was really drawn to in the near-death experience accounts is this distillation of spiritual wisdom into such simple principles that anybody can understand. God is love. Everything is divine, or everything is a part of God's being. And the point of life is to learn to love each other. So it really all boils down to everything is love and everything is divine. And I exited Christianity into the pure simplicity and wonder of the near-death experience message. And honestly, that could have been enough for me, I think, for the rest of my life had I just stayed there, because it really was what I was thirsting for, what I was longing for. If God is love, that means there's nothing to fear, either here or in the afterlife. If everything is divine, that means that I can and do know God within myself and within relationship to everything else I encounter every day of my life. God is very real and very present. And that's the knowledge that I was seeking. And then life is a school of learning how to love makes things so simple. Absolutely everything is about love. If you're in any doubt about how you should respond to any situation, choose the loving response. It's definitely not always easy, but it's very simple. But of course, I didn't stick with just near-death experiences. I began to explore within the New Age movement, and I really found the New Age movement initially to be extremely liberating. The pressure was off. I no longer had to get the doctrine right. It wasn't about the doctrine and the dogma and the head knowledge. In the New Age, it's far more about inner experience. People are free to explore, to find the path that works for them. There's no pressure to proselytize. All paths are accepted as equally valid paths to the divine. So you can allow people to follow their path and trust that they'll get to where they need to go. And you can follow your path without all the guilt and shame and fear and dogma that religion tends to pile onto you. And so I did explore. Near-death experiencers have always kind of been like the gold standard of spirituality for me. But I also found great benefit in Joe Dispenza's teachings, which I've done a video sharing in detail my experience with manifesting following his process. And I've also gotten probably the most benefit, if we're talking about spiritual teachers, from Aaron Abke, who back in that time, which was like 2019, 2020, he was bringing together the gold from the teachings of Jesus, A Course in Miracles, Law of One, and the Eastern teachings of Bhakti Yoga specifically, and kind of combining them together to, again, condense the spiritual teachings into this path of love and devotion and service to others, which I found incredibly compelling. And so my first few years in the New Age movement, from about 2015 to halfway through 2021, I was kind of just like blissed out, high on life, exploring my spiritual path, learning, growing. And then halfway through 2021, a sequence of events unfolded in my life which caused me to get hit with anxiety and panic. And I could no longer connect to the source of strength within me that I had been growing, connecting to the heart center, the love center. And about halfway through 2021, I began to feel very disconnected, very uninspired, just a little bit like disillusioned with the New Age movement in general. And I do think that part of this is because I opened up my YouTube channel in 2021 to start doing interviews rather than just following my path and creating content about what was meaningful to me. And I opened myself up to so many different perspectives, so many different paths within the New Age movement. And I have to be careful what I say here, because I do not want to disrespect or dismiss anybody who shared their story with me, anybody who got up the nerve to share their story online. It's a very hard thing to do. But I will say that even though I spoke with some amazing, wonderful people, it also became very clear to me through the process of doing a podcast that a lot of people in the New Age movement are not actually in it for spiritual reasons. They're in it for very materialistic and selfish reasons. They're in it to make money, to make sales, to get in front of a crowd so they can promote themselves, to create a life for themselves, to create their own dream life and their own happiness. I started to notice, just like after 33 years in Christianity, the issues with that spiritual path became very obvious to me. After several years in the New Age, and now it's been 10 years. It's been 10 years since I discovered near-death experiences, deconstructed my faith, and started exploring the New Age movement. The pitfalls and problems with the New Age movement have now become very clear to me, but it took some time for me to be able to see these things. And I'm going to briefly share 3 examples of what I'm talking about before we move on and get to the heart of what I want to share today, which is where I've landed. The first example of what I'm talking about is law of attraction teachings. So there are many people who are in the New Age movement because of things like The Secret, Law of Attraction, Abraham Hicks, Joe Dispenza even, who are in it because they want to stop suffering. Of course, that's why we're all following a spiritual path. That's why we all do anything, arguably, is because we want to end our suffering. And we think that we can do that by satisfying our desires, by getting what we want in life. And the New Age movement is full of people who are in it to manifest their dream life, to manifest their dream job, their dream partner, to make more money, to create the life that they want to have. While I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with this, law of attraction is a valid path that will take you to the point eventually where you will realize that nothing in the outer world can satisfy you, and no matter what you manifest, you will always want something more. And eventually, following law of attraction teachings will take you to a point where you also realize, I never manifested anything. There is no doer of the actions. It's all an illusion. It's all life manifesting through me. So it is a valid path, and it is a path that I myself followed. And it is a path that people who are coming from an egoic perspective might need to follow. But it is not, in my opinion, true spirituality. There are faster and more direct paths. Rather than teaching somebody that you can have anything you want, you can manifest your dream life, and setting it up like this is really going to make you happy. You're going to create a dream life where you are happy and fulfilled, which is impossible. Why not teach people that love is where it's at? And why not teach people to flip into that flow state of I am flowing with life. I am in an open giving and receiving relationship with life. And when I am open to life, I am open to the world, I am giving myself in service to the world, metaphysically built into that state of consciousness is the fact that my needs will be provided for, and anything that I could need will manifest synchronistically because I'm in an open and giving state. So that's the first issue. A second example would be self-empowerment teachings. It's very common in the New Age movement to hear things like the answers are within you. You are divine. Just look inside yourself and find the answers, find the strength, But divorced from a true spiritual teaching and a true spiritual practice, this advice is meaningless and unhelpful. Because when most people look within themselves, they're looking to their identity, their mental projection they've built about themselves. They're looking to their thoughts, their feelings, their worries, their fears, their likes, their dislikes, which is never where you're going to find the answer. It's never where you're going to find the strength you're looking for. It's never where you're going to hear divine guidance that so many people are looking for. You again have to teach people that it starts with love. It starts with being in heart-based, love-based consciousness. When you raise your frequency to the level of the heart and you calm the mind and you identify yourself as the being that is behind the thoughts, feelings, mental projections, now you are in a state to connect, to hear, to receive guidance, to hear your intuition. And there are people in the New Age movement teaching that, but the movement is so vast and so broad that I think the vast majority of people miss this. Simply for the fact of how many people ask me this question on a regular basis. Yeah, I know all the spiritual stuff. I know law of attraction and I know, all of these things, but I still can't hear from my guidance because nobody's taught you how to identify your true self. Nobody's taught you basic spiritual practices of heart-centered consciousness, of love-based, devotion-based living, of allowance and letting things be. And when you start practicing these things, which I consider to be true spiritual practices, the rest falls into place. Suddenly you can hear your guidance. Suddenly your spiritual gifts start coming online, which is my next example is that the New Age is full of people who are chasing spiritual gifts as an end to themselves. So people want to know, how can I develop healing abilities? How can I develop psychic abilities? How can I know the future? How can I become a medium? How can I have these spiritual gifts so that my ego can feel like it's a step above? So I can identify with myself as a healer or a psychic or a medium or an astral traveler or whatever it may be. Anybody who is seeking these gifts for the purpose of having these gifts still has an ego identification with being a healer or a this or a that. And when egos get a hold of spiritual gifts, disasters follow. This is why there have been mystery schools for thousands of years throughout time who have kept esoteric knowledge secret intentionally, because the keepers of this knowledge know that if humanity in an undeveloped spiritual state, an ego state that is still focused on providing for my own needs, I have to provide for me and mine, and I have to stockpile what I have for a rainy day, and I have to defend myself against my enemies. If humanity had access to esoteric knowledge that would allow them to have higher spiritual and psychic gifts, that we would destroy ourselves. We would use this knowledge to create weapons, to amass wealth. And this is exactly what has happened throughout time and what is still happening today. Spiritual gifts develop naturally out of an expanded state of consciousness. When we reach love-based consciousness, there is an embodiment and a lived experience of our oneness with others. And out of that lived experience of oneness, when you can literally feel your oneness with another, your healing will flow from you to them. It will automatically be offered to them without you ever having to develop healing gifts. When you experience your oneness with others, telepathy develops because you're connected with them on an energetic level without you ever having to learn how to have telepathy. When you're living from love-based consciousness and your mind is quiet, you develop psychic abilities because the chatter of the mind is gone and you're connected to the energetic field of information. These things develop naturally as we develop higher states of consciousness. So anybody who is chasing the gifts as an end to themselves is showing that they are not yet at a spiritual level to be able to safely use these gifts. And just like in charismatic Christianity, in the New Age movement, there is a hyper fixation on having spiritual gifts because so many people are still wrapped up in ego identity. All right, so bringing us forward to today. In 2021, I started becoming disillusioned with the New Age movement. In 2024, my YouTube channel started struggling. I did a video, I believe in November of 2024, about how my channel was dying and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to continue podcasting. Without boring you with all the details of what happened, I was forced at that point in my life to change directions. And I completely surrendered myself and I said, okay, whatever the divine plan is for my life, show me. Even if that means it's not YouTube. Even if it means I have to give up. And I listed all the things in my life that were important to me. And I actually have been asked to give up multiple of them. But I got to the point where I said, okay, whatever the divine plan is, I want to be in flow with the divine plan. I want to be living my true purpose, whatever that looks like. And I was very quickly redirected onto the path of researching the historical Jesus and the historical evidence that we have on the early Christian movement. I wasn't planning this. It was the last thing that I was expecting to happen, but a sequence of events just forced me onto this path, and this is where I'm at now. I have been on a mission. I have been digging back to find out the truth about what happened. There is so much that has been covered up by the powers of the world. Those that are in power, those who have access to the wealth, have been covering up the true revelations of God in the Judeo-Christian stream of spirituality since the original revelation that was given to Moses thousands of years ago. I have done videos going into detail about what I've uncovered, and I'm going to continue with that series. It is called The True Jesus Way. I have a playlist called The True Jesus Way on YouTube, so you can check it out and keep following along. But today I'm going to share a summary of everything that I've learned. There's been several areas of focus for me. The first was researching ancient Judaism and this anti-sacrifice theme that you find throughout the Bible since the original revelation given to Moses. I discovered a book called the Moses Scroll, which may be the earliest version, a proto-Deuteronomic text that could actually be connected to the original scroll that Moses wrote. There are scholars heavily researching this right now. Ross Nichols is one of them. And I learned from Aaron Abke's podcast, The True Jesus Way, that they think they know where this scroll is and they're trying to locate it so that they can date it. Anyway, this scroll could be the oldest revelation, the oldest version of the law that was given to Moses, and it does not include any mention of sacrifice or Levitical laws. It includes the 10 Commandments and the blessings and curses associated with the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are a little bit different, but one of them is you shall not hate your brother in your heart. So the way the 10 Commandments are laid out in this scroll is it's very much love God and love your neighbor. Treat each other the way that you want to be treated. Don't hate your brother in your heart. Don't kill. Don't commit adultery. All very, very simple code of living, which is all about how we treat each other. And then if you follow the teachings of the prophets throughout the Old Testament, you see a very clear anti-sacrifice theme. There are passages where scholars can tell that commands of bringing sacrifices and burnt offerings to the temple were actually interpolated, added into the text after the fact, and were not there originally. So it begs the question, if sacrifices were never meant to be part of the original Jewish faith, Hebrew faith, I mean, it changes everything. It changes absolutely everything. Because if sacrifice was never required by God, then Jesus couldn't have come to be the blood sacrifice. The second area of research for me has been about the Jewish sect, the Essenes, that broke off from mainstream Judaism in about 300 BCE, and how their writings reveal that they were vehemently anti-sacrifice. And I've also been reading Dolores Cannon, who wrote a couple of books where she regressed people who had past lives with Jesus. And she reveals that they were one of the ancient mystery schools that taught esoteric knowledge and kept it hidden from the other people of their time, specifically the Romans, because the Romans were terrified of the knowledge that they had. So we have this whole anti-sacrifice theme of just love God and love people. That's all that God requires of you. Don't kill animals, love each other. That's what I want. All throughout the Old Testament, the prophets are saying, do what I've asked you to do, which is to love your neighbor. That's all I want from you. Then we have this Essenian sect who broke off from mainstream Judaism that said, no, God never wanted sacrifices. God wants us to follow the original unadulterated law, which is about love. And then a third area of research for me has been, what do the critical historical scholars say that we actually know about Jesus? What did Jesus actually teach? And we're going to get into that in a moment. I'm really going to dive into that. But the fourth area of study for me has been Dolores Cannon's books. Everything that she says in these books is in direct agreement with what all these other sources are saying. What we know about the Essenes from the Dead Sea Scrolls, what scholars like Bart Ehrman, John Dominic Crossan, the Jesus Seminar, what everybody is saying that we can know conclusively about the historical Jesus is corroborated by this book and brought to life by these books. There's this one, and then there's one other called Jesus and the Essenes, but I'm not sure where I put that one at the moment. But these books really bring it to life and show us what was Jesus actually like and the details of his ministry and his teachings and what it looked like. So I'm going to share more deeply what I've learned from these books from Dolores Cannon, and then I'm also going to share what I've learned from the historical scholars about what Jesus actually taught. In this book and Jesus and the Essenes, I learned a lot about the life of Jesus. And there's a couple things that I want to pull out for you guys. My cats, all three of them are over here playing. Sorry. The first is that Jesus was connected to the Qumran Essenian group and started education there as a young child. He learned everything that the Essenian school had to offer, which was very rare. Usually people would pick one point of study and focus on it. But Jesus learned everything, had mastered everything that the entire school had to offer, and then left and actually traveled around to the other mystery schools, to every mystery school, I believe, in the known world at the time. She mentions India, Egypt, the Druid school in England, and I think there's a couple others. There's at least one more. And he fully learned and mastered all of the teachings at those schools as well. In this book, They Walked with Jesus, Dolores shares the story of a woman who had lived as Jesus's niece. And so she knew a lot of personal firsthand information about Jesus. And she talks in this book about how Jesus had been unhappy with the fact that all of these mystery schools kept the esoteric teachings and knowledge from the common person. And he said that one of the reasons that this happened was to control people. He did not think that that was okay. And he wanted to take this information and make it accessible to the common person in a way that they could understand. And that was one of the reasons why he taught in parables, because he was trying to relate these deep esoteric concepts into everyday things from people's lives. The second thing that I want to pull out from this book is how Jesus did his ministry. So he actually went on months-long missions. In between, he would go back and visit his family, look for people who would want to be in his group and go on these trips with him. Then he would set out with his disciples and his followers. He would take doctors and healers with him and people who had different skills who could help out the group and be of service to the people that they were ministering to. And he would hit several locations on a trip. He would go to one place and be there for a month just ministering to the people in need and teaching. Then he would hit another location and then another before he would go back home to regroup. one of the places that he frequented was the leper community. The lepers, of course, were people that nobody else wanted anything to do with. So Jesus would go there and he would stay there for a month at a time, and he would heal whoever's karma allowed them to be healed, or whoever could receive it from him. And the rest, he would relieve their pain so that they no longer would feel the suffering caused by their disease. And then the doctors and healers would treat their wounds and minister to them. And they would just stay there for a month, just loving them and serving them and taking care of them. And then they would go on to like maybe a small village where there were people who were interested in Jesus' teachings, and he would have meetings underground. And he had to sort of be really careful because the religious and political leaders were already feeling threatened by him. So he would go around from village to village, and he would spend his day ministering to the ill, the elderly, the orphans, the widows, just whoever he could be of service to. And then in the evening, he would have underground meetings where he would share the teachings with those who were interested. And this is how he started building his following. So what were the teachings that he was sharing? It all boiled down to love God and love others. And in future videos, I'm going to go into depth on this because it's so fascinating and important. But the way that Jesus presented the greatest commandment of love God in this book specifically is that he says, love the God within yourself. So he was teaching people this idea that we're all equal, we're all divine, we're all human, we're all the same, and you have to look within yourself to find the connection to source, and you have to heal yourself first, and you have to be strong in your own love, and then out of the abundance of that love and that God connection within yourself, you serve others. You have to heal yourself, and then you can heal others. So he wasn't teaching this warped version of service to others that religion often teaches, which is just give and give and give and allow yourself to be taken advantage of and used. He was building people up within first and saying, heal yourself first, connect to source within yourself so that you are connected to that abundant flow, and then you can take that healing and offer it to the world. And she talks in the book about how he never turned anyone away and about how his teachings completely revolved around being of service, service to others, loving other people as you would like to be loved. With all that in mind, I would now like to share with you a summary of what I've learned from the historical sources about Jesus, the earliest texts. So first of all, the earliest text that most scholars agree upon is referred to as Q. Some scholars like James Edward, I've been reading this book by James Edward, The Hebrew Gospel and the Development of the Synoptic Tradition, which I'm going to share about more soon. But James Edward disagrees with the Q hypothesis, but he does agree that there is a shared source of material for Matthew and Luke, although he doesn't call it Q. But most scholars agree that there is a shared source of material that Matthew and Luke, the authors of the canonical Gospels of Matthew and Luke, copied from, and that this is one of our earliest sources dating to about the 50s CE. So I first started reading and studying Q to see, well, what does Jesus say in Q? One of the most interesting passages in Q, pointed out by John Dominic Crossan, is when Jesus is sending out his followers to spread his mission and his message, like we just learned about how he was doing from these Dolores Cannon books. He actually told them in Q not to take a knapsack, a staff, or sandals. And the significance of this is because a knapsack is where you take, food and provisions for the journey, or you can take payment with you back from the job. A staff is what they defended themselves from if they were under attack. And so the significance of this is A, non-violence, because they weren't supposed to take a staff, but B, trusting God to provide for their needs. They were not putting these spiritual teachings or services that they were offering behind a paywall. There was no price for them. Jesus instructed them in Q to take whatever was offered to them because a laborer is worth his wages. So the idea behind this is freely give and freely receive. Jesus was teaching a higher state of consciousness. that state that I was speaking about earlier in this video, that law of attraction will lead you to, where if you use law of attraction enough times, you'll realize I'm not the one doing the manifesting. It's all one thing in the universe. Life with a capital L is just flowing through me and manifesting through me because I'm living in an open-hearted state of giving and receiving. Any need that someone else has, I freely give, and any need that I have, I freely receive from the universe. And this, I believe, is what Jesus was teaching his followers by saying, don't take a knapsack or a staff. Go with open-hearted love and service to others, and your needs will be provided for. And anything that you are given, you freely receive that because you are worthy of receiving, but you need to also freely give. Don't go into it thinking, what can I get? What price can I put on this? Go into it with the intention of giving and watch how you will also be provided for and receive. John Dominic Crossan points out how, by the time the Gospel of Mark was written 10 to 15 years later, we have Jesus telling his disciples it's okay to take a staff. And then by the time Luke was written, a decade or so after that, we have Jesus actually amending his previous statement and telling his disciples to take a sword. And so that's how quickly the original teachings of Jesus got changed. And Christianity as a whole right now has no idea what Jesus actually taught. Another passage in the Q source is along the same lines. It's no surprise. The passage about not worrying about what you will eat or drink or what you will wear, and trusting that your Heavenly Father will provide you with whatever you need. That's in Q. It's along the same lines. Also in Q, of course, is, I believe it's called the Sermon on the Plain. It's like the correlation to the Sermon on the Mount, but where Jesus says things like, love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you. When you loan something to someone, don't expect repayment, things like that. But I want to share with you now another really, really fascinating document, and it's called the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, or the Gospel to the Hebrews. And Christianity, your average Christian has no idea that this document even existed, but I've been reading this book by James Edwards where he lays out every reference to the Hebrew Gospel in the writings of the early church fathers. And I believe he says there are over 75 references to this document total. It was an authoritative, widespread source in the early centuries of Christianity. It was not ultimately included in the canon, but it was used at times by the early church fathers to shed light on what the canonical gospels meant. And here's the thing, everybody who references it agrees that it was actually written by the disciple Matthew, and it is a direct eyewitness account of Jesus. So of course the question is, what is in this Gospel of the Hebrews? And James Edwards argues in this book and has some very convincing evidence to show that it was actually a source for the canonical Gospel of Luke. I will get into all of this in a future video because it's a lot of detail. I don't have time for all of it today. But needless to say, I began doing my research on what's called Special Luke, which is the material in Luke that is not shared with Matthew or Mark, and that was clearly, because the amount of Semitisms in it, translated from a Hebrew gospel. James Edwards argues that it was translated from the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. So I began looking at it to see, what does it say? And it's just so clear to me that these teachings came directly from Jesus himself. I mean, they are so inspired. And I'm just going to share a few of them with you here. In Special Luke, which I believe is a translation of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, which was an eyewitness account to Jesus's ministry, we have the story of the prodigal son, free mercy and forgiveness. In fact, I don't know how a story like the prodigal son can be in the Bible and Christians still believe that the gospel is about blood sacrifice and hell and judgment. We have the story of Zacchaeus, where people are so upset with Jesus because he's going to hang out with someone that everybody hates. Zacchaeus leaves his meeting with Jesus saying that he is going to sell half of what he has and give it to the poor. To which Jesus replies, salvation has come to this house. So Jesus is equating salvation with giving to the poor. In Special Luke, we also have the story of the Good Samaritan. Somebody asks Jesus what he must do to inherit eternal life. The response to that question is, love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. The person asks Jesus, who is my neighbor? And in response, Jesus shares the story of the Good Samaritan, where a man was beat up and left for dead on the side of the road. Two religious leaders passed by this dying man and left him there because they were too good to stop and help him, probably because he was unclean. But a Samaritan, somebody who the Jews despised, absolutely despised, passed by this dying man, helped him, took care of his wounds, paid to have him taken care of at an inn. And Jesus says, that person, the Samaritan, the person that you all despise, he is your neighbor. Go and do likewise. Fourth, in Special Luke, we have the parable of the rich fool, in which a rich man has so much money that all of his needs are provided for, so he stockpiles his wealth instead of giving it to the poor and needy. And Jesus condemns this man for stockpiling his wealth. Kind of continuing on the same theme of don't take a knapsack with you when you go to do ministry work. Don't stock things up for yourselves when there's people who are suffering in the world that aren't taken care of. Fifth, in Special Luke, we have the invitation to the poor, in which Jesus says, do not invite your brother over for dinner or your friends over for dinner because they can invite you back and repay you. But invite the crippled, the lame, the blind, the maimed, because you will be blessed when they cannot repay you. The final passage that I want to share with you today is actually a quotation of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. It's a variation of the rich young ruler story and is probably the earliest and most accurate. For those not familiar, the rich young ruler asks Jesus what he must do to inherit eternal life, and Jesus tells him to keep the commandments. And when the rich young ruler responds that he has kept the commandments from his youth, Jesus tells him to sell his possessions and give to the poor if he wants to be perfect and come follow Jesus. In the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, there's additional commentary from Jesus where he says, how can you say that you have kept the law and the prophets when it's written in the law, love your neighbor as yourself, and your many brothers are dying from hunger, while your house is filled with many good things and none of those good things are going out to your brothers dying from hunger. So again, we see this theme of stockpiling wealth and prioritizing your own needs rather than helping and serving others when we have the capability to do so. That Jesus was against this, and this was a core teaching of his. This man, Jesus the Nazarene, was, in my opinion, the greatest master who has ever walked the face of the earth. He learned the teachings from all of the mystery schools in the known world during his lifetime, and he mastered them. He understood the heart of those teachings in a way that no one else did. Because to understand the heart of esoteric knowledge means that you can't keep that knowledge secret and hidden. Because the heart of the teachings is love and service to others. This is what so many in the New Age movement miss. While religion is caught up in doctrine and dogma and fire and brimstone, the New Age has crash landed into ego, materialism, and greed and selfishness. The teachings of Jesus are the anchor for all spiritual paths. What Jesus did is he took the esoteric knowledge of all of the mystery schools and he distilled it down to the simplest form. If you do this, you can't mess it up. If you follow these teachings of love God and love your neighbor as yourself, live in flow, an open-hearted state of giving and receiving, in a state of worshipful devotion to the divine in everything, throwing yourself on the mercy of life to provide for you and support you. Living in this blissed out, love-based consciousness where you experience your oneness with all. And you don't live in fear or worry about how things are going to work out or how you'll be provided for. This is the heart of all the esoteric teachings and all the mystery schools. And this is the way that they are supposed to be followed. And when they are followed in this way, you can't mess it up. You can't crash land into ego and selfishness and materialism. You can't get caught up in dogma and doctrine. You're getting the most purely distilled version of the most powerful mystery teachings ever known to humankind. If we follow the Jesus way, we won't destroy ourselves seeking esoteric knowledge and then using that knowledge to make weapons of mass destruction or to hoard wealth and keep it for the few. All the ways that humanity has messed up before is because we have not understood that spiritual development and awakening into the heart center, into love-based consciousness is the foundation. It is the only spiritual path. It is the only spiritual practice which will actually allow us to evolve as a species. We can't take the teachings of Jesus and end up destroying civilization or wearing ourselves out chasing law of attraction or living in fear worrying about hell in the afterlife, because Jesus's teachings are grounded in love. They're grounded in something so solid. So this is where I find myself today. No, I'm not going back to Christianity. Some of you may have thought that from my title. I don't identify as a Christian. I don't identify as a New Ager. I consider myself to be a follower of the way, a follower of the greatest master who's ever lived, a follower of the most condensed and powerful spiritual path I have ever found in all of my searching, a follower of the most direct path to divine union and spiritual evolution. I'm a follower of the way, the original way of Jesus. To me, what does this look like? Well, A, it looks like loving God, the greatest commandment, living in an awe state with life, a worshipful state of devotion to life, to others, to whoever crosses my path, to the divine intelligence behind it all, living in an awe state of gratitude and worship and open-hearted giving and receiving and surrendered trust like a child. And when you live that way, the second commandment of loving your neighbor as yourself is the natural outpouring. Love for all, my fellow human, my fellow animal, for the earth. And out of the abundance within myself, what do I have to give and how can I serve? And for me, that also includes not eating meat. I know people have a real problem with that in my comment section and have been very clear about the fact that if you don't stop pushing your veganism on me, I'm going to unsubscribe. Well, I'm not pushing anything on anyone. I've only shared that I choose not to eat meat because I don't want to cause suffering to others. And there is tons of documentation that early Christians were vegetarians. So take that for what it's worth. I will say that if you're so triggered and offended by somebody simply sharing that they choose not to eat meat, maybe you should look at your attachment to meat, because what is it that's causing such a response in you? 3, for me, this is about nonviolence to humans, nonviolence to animals, not contributing to the best of my ability to suffering in any form. This means avoiding commercialism, because so many of the products that we can get in big stores and on Amazon were created through the suffering of others. Fast fashion. You guys comment about my outfits and how I change them in some of my videos, which is kind of a fun thing to do just to keep the video interesting. But I actually am a minimalist. I have a very small wardrobe and I buy most of my clothes secondhand in an effort to not contribute to the suffering of people who are in the supply chain, being exposed to toxic chemicals and working long hours with little pay. So things like that I try to think about. Fourth, to me, this looks like simple living. I don't need to have more stuff than I need. Of course, I'm going to provide for my children. Of course, it's okay for people to provide for their needs and to enjoy life, but I don't need to be buried down with a bunch of stuff. It really just chokes the life out of you. And I have found that with a simpler way of life and less dependence on stuff, I actually have a lot more joy, a lot more peace can be found in just connecting to nature and having simple meals and buying secondhand. There's less to worry about, there's less to take care of, and there's more peace to just enjoy my family, enjoy nature, enjoy the joy of being and just being present. And also for me, this means being very thoughtful and intentional about the way that I make money, especially because I am in the spiritual niche. This is another topic I'm going to talk a lot more about. But part of the reason that I think I have had trouble making money and being successful financially is because my heart is not in alignment with charging people money for spiritual knowledge. I have no problem charging money for my paintings or charging brands money to advertise on my channel. That's a little bit different, but I really am not in alignment with charging people money to access spiritual knowledge and spiritual help. And so because of this, I have decided to make my business model donation based. I have been so inspired by what I've been learning about the Jesus way that I've decided that I want to, in my membership community, which so many of you are already a part and already supporting, but I really want to model it after the teachings of Jesus. And I've been thinking about how can I really create a community that empowers people to live this type of lifestyle. I have several things that I want to implement. It's just a matter of me finding the time to be able to do it because I'm doing everything myself right now. As far as the YouTube channel, the community, the editing, the administrative work, it's all me at the moment. And so things move a little slower than I would like them to, but I have some really exciting plans for the community to implement more classes for people to take, to be able to learn these teachings, these foundational teachings of the Jesus way, challenges so that we can implement the teachings. I want to start a live stream where we can gather for meditation and worship. There is a free community where you have access to the community threads. The base price is $2.50 a month because I feel like that's so affordable to literally almost anybody. And then you can choose your tiers from there. So you can choose to give like $10 a month or $25 a month. And I like to have it that way because then what I'm offering in the community is accessible to pretty much anybody, but people who are benefited by the work and the content in the community can choose to give more, and people that are able to could choose to give, say, $10 a month or $25 a month to help pay for people who aren't able to, who can only afford the $2.50 a month. So if you'd like to join and you're interested in joining and you want to be part of the original Jesus way movement and living it together in community, check out the link right here or in my description box. It's Love Covered Life Sanctuary. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Now go live your most extravagantly loving life.